Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our second of our three-part top 10 prediction series. Of course, last week we had the top 10 quarterback predictions, and in this episode we have the top 10 running back duo predictions, and then next week we will finish it all out with the top 10 wide receiver trio predictions. No huge news this week, so no other reason than to just get right into it, starting with Callan and his honorable mention.
And my honorable mention here, I'm going to start off with is the Cleveland Browns and the running backs of Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford. Now, there's kind of a trend here with my honorable mentions because, like last week, my honorable mention is coming off a big injury. Even though there's not multiple running backs, like I had grouped the quarterbacks into the injury in the honorable mention, I wanted to give an honorable mention to the Browns here because I think that had it not been for Nick Chubb's injury, the Browns would have been a top team last year. They already made the playoffs without him. Jerome Ford got a lot of starting experience and was really a good running back for them and will be a solid backup to Nick Chubb, who's coming off that blown knee. What did he blow out his entire knee?
He just ripped his knee in half,
Yeah,
pretty much.
pretty
Yeah.
much. It was a bad injury, but he's at full strength and ready to go for this next season. I think that he's going to surprise some people because that injury happened so early on in the season last year. People kind of forgot about Nick Chubb, and he was a very explosive running back, and I think he still will be.
I'm one of those people. When I looked at Callan's list, I filled mine out and then looked at his and filled out the little chart that we do. And I was like, oh yeah, Nick Chubb's the guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, Nick Chubb is an absolute beast. The fact that he had that bad of an injury and he's already coming back is so impressive. And I think Jerome Ford could really continue to prove himself too. I mean, when Jerome Ford and Joe Flacco make the playoffs, just imagine what that team would have been with Nick Chubb, their true, really number one option on that offense and workhorse there. Now moving over to my honorable mentions, I have the Chicago Bears with DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson. And this is my honorable mention because it is just kind of a huge hit or miss. I mean, DeAndre Swift really kind of started to prove himself last year in Detroit. I think there was a lot of other factors helping him out in Detroit. I don't really know how much it was just DeAndre.
Philly last year, you mean?
Or yeah, Philly, sorry.
Yeah.
But yes, I don't know. I think a lot of other factors were helping him out in Philly. The offensive line, the passing game prevalence, the ability of the tush push and him not having to get that 1 yard very often, or inches very often, I should say. Or, in the case of the tush push, like 4 to 5 yards sometimes. But the real swing with this one is not only will DeAndre Swift continue to play well, but it's will Roschon Johnson be what he has the chance to be. I really like Roschon Johnson. He was a totally underrated guy coming out of the draft last year just because he got overshadowed by Bijan Robinson, which of course he did because Bijan Robinson was a generational talent. But I think that he has a chance to be really good. I think that he would have been a starting running back and a star running back at almost any other school last year, but he just kind of had the bad luck of ending up behind Bijan Robinson. But so this one is my honorable mention purely because it's a true swing for the fences, but if it hits, it's going to hit big.
Yeah, it's a nice duo. I think they're just a little bit too inexperienced. Roschon Johnson obviously doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires, which may actually be a beneficiary, but I like that kind of having the experience going with your running backs. And DeAndre Swift, he's bounced around now from Detroit to Philly, now to Chicago. He's not sticking for a reason. I'm not sure what that is because he's had really good performances in Detroit and Philly. But for whatever reason, he's just not sticking on a team. And I think that there's just something there that he's missing.
Yeah, he's going to be shaking his fists at Detroit going back home.
Yep. And moving on to number 10, I got the Miami Dolphins with Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane. And I think that this is going to be one of those track teams track running back rooms where these are just complete speedsters when you look at Raheem Mostert and Achane, who really broke out last year and had really a lot of big games. But what knocks them down on this list is that they're not very durable. And that's one thing you got to have to be a running back. You got to be able to be durable. And unfortunately, with Achane and Raheem Mostert, both of them get banged up pretty easily. And I think because of that, they're a little bit lower on this list. But don't be surprised if they end up as one of the top running back duos to end the year next year.
Yeah, they are inarguably a top 15. A little bit of a spoiler alert. I don't have them in my top 10, but I 100% would have them in my top 15, probably in that like 11 to 12 area. I don't know. Those track teams work really well, those pure speedster guys. But once they get found out and once they kind of get banged up a little bit, they just go downhill so fast. You see it a lot through history. The only one I can think of who truly like continuously played really well year after year is CJ2K. And even he kind of had some injury troubles and some down years and not the length of a career running back would usually have. So I just think those pure speedster guys kind of get found out. They had a really hot season last year, so I see a little bit of a cooler one this year. But moving on to my number 10, I wanted to get at least one rookie in here because especially with running backs, there's always a young guy who breaks out. And I actually have, I was about to say the first running back off the board. He was not though, but I have one of the top running backs that was on the board coming into the draft. And I have the Rams with Kyren Williams and rookie Blake Corum out of Michigan. Now, Kyren Williams is another young guy, another young duo here to kind of go with my honorable mention. But Kyren Williams absolutely broke onto the scene as just a workhorse. Well, not really as much as a workhorse, but just a true jack of all trades, do it all type guy. Great out of the backfield, great in the blocking game, a really hard-nosed runner. But I think one of his weakest parts was that power game, and that's where Blake Corum's going to thrive. He's going to come in, he's going to be your power back. He's not afraid to hit the line at full speed, to get hit by those big defensive linemen. And it's going to really take some of that wear and tear off Kyren Williams because by the end of the year, I mean, he was their only running back really. And you kind of saw that pop up with some injuries towards the end of the year, some missed downs, some missed whole games. So I think Blake Corum's going to be able to take that kind of bruiser back away from him and let him just focus on what he's best at and kind of stay healthier through the year.
Yeah, I could see Blake Corum actually taking over the role here as the
too.
lead back because he was a superstar coming out of Michigan and was a Heisman frontrunner before he tore his ACL 2 years ago. And he still was kind of recovering from that ACL injury all through last year. He mostly just wanted to win a national title. I don't think he was given a full effort. Maybe effort's not the word here, but maybe he wasn't fully healthy. He wasn't 100%. But because of that, I think he will be 100% now coming into this year. And I would not be surprised if Blake Corum ends up as the starting running back for the Los Angeles Rams.
Ooh, throwback there.
Almost.
I don't see him becoming starter, but I see them by probably around midseason almost being 50-50, like being a true two platoon type thing. But yeah.
And then moving on to my number 9, I got the Baltimore Ravens with Derrick Henry and Justice Hill. And this is more of my leaning towards the number 1, kind of the lead back as being a heavier hitter of the duo. And obviously with Derrick Henry, he's one of the top running backs in the NFL. And even though he did leave the Titans, he's going to get a fresh start with the Baltimore Ravens and that run power offense led by Lamar Jackson. And now the Baltimore Ravens have that real big bruiser and speedster in Derrick Henry, who's that all-around running back and can do it all and be the 3-down guy. And then they still have Justice Hill to kind of be a change of pace guy and give Derrick Henry some breathers. So I think they're going to make a fantastic duo, but I think that they drop down the list here because they're not so much a duo as more of a lead back, one running back room.
Yeah, you'll see a trend throughout this that Cal went a little more RB1 heavy and I went much more RB2 heavy, which neither way is wrong because, I mean, to be a duo, you got to take the average, you got to put them together and divide the two, you know how it goes. But yeah, you'll just kind of notice that throughout this. I do like Derrick Henry, but he's getting up there. He was seemingly immortal for a while there in Tennessee, but you kind of saw some of that wear and tear take over from 30, 40 carries a game, which of course it does eventually. I mean, something's got to give when you're burning the candle at both ends. But yeah, Justice Hill just kind of took him way too far down for me to have them up on my list. But moving over to my number 9, I have somebody who Callan surprisingly doesn't have on his list, but I have the Green Bay Packers with Josh Jacobs and A.J. Dillon. Now, I really like Josh Jacobs. This was one of the most scary signings for the offseason for a Vikings fan especially, but one of my favorite signings of the offseason was them going out letting Aaron Jones walk and get paid somewhere else and paying a little more money, but getting Josh Jacobs, who I think is a better running back overall. And I think just a smidge, but a little younger, if I'm not mistaken. But what really moved them down the list and didn't have them even higher for me with how high I am on Josh Jacobs was A.J. Dillon's down year last year. It kind of seemed the year before like he was really going to take over and start being that number one back. And then almost in the same colors as Alexander Madison kind of did, when he got his chance to be that true number one back, he just didn't explode out of the scene. He didn't do terrible, but he just wasn't a number one guy. So if A.J. Dillon can really kind of sit back and just be that true bruiser, that true change of pace back, like he was when Aaron Jones was in his prime a few years ago, and A.J. Dillon was really in his prime a few years ago, or at least at the height of his career, I could see them being much higher than 9. But for now, I just kind of got to judge it how it went last year for A.J. Dillon, and I have him pulling them down a little bit to 9.
And, surprisingly, a spoiler, I do not have the Packers on this list for a couple of reasons. For my reasons is that Josh Jacobs is coming off a very bad year in Las Vegas. And the history of free agent running backs going to new teams does not bode well for Josh Jacobs. A lot of times these running backs will go to new teams and be big busts. And I'm afraid of that happening, especially with as much wear and tear as Josh Jacobs has had in Las Vegas. Now, that being said, the other reason I don't have him on my list is because I don't see this as a duo. I see this as a one running back room and a surprise cut of A.J. Dillon at preseason roster trim down because of Marshawn Lloyd, the rookie draft pick at USC, who has shown very much remnant flashes of Aaron Jones and what Aaron Jones has done before in camp, in the mini camps and the OTAs. So I like Marshawn Lloyd to actually be the number 2 running back here for the Packers and be a surprise possible rookie of the year candidate.
Interesting. I like it. Yeah, he did really well with Caleb Williams there in USC. He was part of that just overly dynamic offense. I mean, everything they didn't have in defense, they couldn't quite make up for in offense, but they sure tried. They were sure close. But very interesting prediction.
Yeah.
I like that there.
And moving on to my number 8, I got the Tennessee Titans of Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. And I really like this offense this year. I think this is going to be a fantastic, explosive offense. It's going to all come down to their second-year quarterback, Will Levis, and how well he performs. But he has the weapons around him. He has a wide receiver group that, we'll talk about next week, because they have a very dynamic wide receiver group, and the running back room of Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, who are basically 2 of the same running back. But the way that this offense is going to be built, it's not going to be a ground and pound type of offense. It's going to be an air it out. Running backs are going to catch the ball, wide receivers, tight ends. This is going to be a very fun offense to watch. And it starts with Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears coming out of the backfield.
Yeah, the days of Mike Vrabel are gone. It is Brian Callahan now. He is air raid. That's what he wants to do. He showed it in Cincinnati. So I do really like Tony Pollard, and almost just as much with the way he filled in for Derrick Henry, I like Tyjae Spears. The only thing that kept them off my list on this one is just that they're too similar. When I look at a duo, which like you said, it makes complete sense. Like I'm not arguing that at all. But when I look at a duo, I want that 1-2. I want that thunder and lightning. And these guys are just 1-1, lightning. They're just too similar for me. But I think that they're both very good at what they do, and I think that they will fit into that offense well in the long run. Moving on to my number 8, and probably my kind of shocker for the list, I have the Los Angeles Chargers with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. And why this one is a shocker is because this one just really depends on if these guys can stay healthy. I mean, you saw them together in Baltimore, and when they were both on the field and both playing, granted, Baltimore was a very run-favorable offense with the offensive line and playbook they had, but they did really well when they could be that 1-2 punch. And if they can both stay healthy this year in Los Angeles, I think we see that success and even multiplied with John Harbaugh taking over and bringing that run-oriented, run-favoring offense there to Los Angeles. And I mean, with Justin Herbert's arm and the fact that they stopped their weird trend of just having 6'5" wide receivers and nothing else, I think that we kind of see them spread the field vertically a lot more. And I mean, when you can start spreading that field vertically and get those speedsters down the field, and you have a guy with an absolute cannon for a right arm like Justin Herbert, it opens up the run game like nothing else. And when you got a run oriented head coach like John Harbaugh, that bodes well for running backs coming in, even two new running backs coming in.
Yeah, there's two new running backs coming in because they got rid of Austin Eckler. But you do have Bus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins coming in, and they were quite the tandem in Baltimore, like you said. And we'll see if it can repeat in L.A. here for the Chargers. Now, J.K. Dobbins is another running back coming off one of those Achilles injuries. So he'll be interesting to see how well he bounces back from yet another season-ending injury for J.K. Dobbins, who's had a couple of them. And he's been my knock on him.
Yeah.
I've been down on J.K. Dobbins, and last year I was finally drafted him in the fantasy league. I thought I had it. Like it lasted 3 games.
Yeah, no, I love J.K. Dobbins. I've always been really high on J.K. Dobbins, but it's just undeniable that he's just so injury prone. So that's the big asterisk on that one, is if they can stay healthy. Because Gus Edwards is not injury prone, but he's had injuries himself as well.
Yeah. And moving on to my number 7, I got the Houston Texans with Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce. And this is really a fantastic duo, I feel like. And this is going to be part of the Texans offense that I feel like is going to take the NFL by storm this year. Joe Mixon comes over from Cincinnati, where he was a longtime starter and a Super Bowl appearance. So he has that playoff experience to go with this young Houston team. And then Dameon Pierce, who was their starter all through last year, is now their number 2 running back. So you got 2 basically number 1 guys as your 2 running backs, and I think that's just going to work out fantastically for the Houston Texans, and they're going to have an explosive offense this year.
I absolutely love this duo. There's no other way to put it, and I'm going to move on to my next one only because I'm going to talk about them a hell of a lot more later. But moving over to at my number 7, I have another little bit of a shocker here, but one that I think is really going to work out well. I have the Seattle Seahawks running back duo of Kenneth Walker Jr. and Zach Charbonnet. Now, Kenneth Walker has just proved himself. I don't think he's junior. I think he's the 3rd, actually, if I'm not mistaken. But he has been an absolute beast both his years in the league. Callan can vouch for me. I think I said it since the draft because I truly believed it since the draft, whether I said it or not. But I thought they got an absolute steal when they got him out of Michigan State. It was sometime day 2 or maybe even early day 3. They got him way late. And he came out and did okay as a rookie, but then absolutely blew up his sophomore year last year. I thought he just looked like he continually got better. If I'm not mistaken, I think other than maybe a game or 2, he stayed pretty healthy, which when you're a running back, you're going to miss a game or 2. It's just kind of how it goes. But yeah, he stayed healthy most of the time, which is a huge thing, especially for these young running backs who are just entering the league. I think Kenneth Walker not only continues to grow, but continues to make leaps and bounds and gets better and better. And I think that Zach Charbonnet is just such a good, like I said earlier, with the Thunder and Lightning, I think he's such a good complement to Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker does have that power, but he's also got a little bit of a smaller frame. He can get through the line. He's patient when getting through the holes in the offensive line. But Zach Charbonnet is just like one of those little Maurice Jones-Drew type wrecking ball guys. He's going to get in there. He's going to get the height advantage on you. He's going to get low on you, and he's going to be able to run through you. But then he's also surprisingly good out of the backfield. I think that's something that's kind of underrated about him. He showed it a lot at UCLA before he got drafted last year, and he got to show it a little bit in Seattle, but they were kind of such a between the tackles run-oriented team that he didn't get to come out of the backfield overly often. But I just see both of these guys really making leaps and bounds, and I think this backfield only continues to get better for years and years.
Yeah, this is definitely a very young duo, a very young backfield, and like you said, they will grow together and could be even better in the future. I personally am not very high on the Seahawks this year. I think they're going to have a down year because of that young running back room. There's no real veteran leadership as far as the running back room goes. Geno Smith has kind of been on decline since his height of his first year in Seattle. He kind of had a bit of a falling out there at the end of last year.
Sophomore slump.
Sophomore slump. That's how it goes. But I think that because of that, Seahawks just aren't gonna be very good this year. I think they're gonna end up with a high draft pick, and even though running back is, I think, one of their better positions, just because they're so young, and I don't see them doing very well, I just don't have them on my list this year.
Interesting. I'm the opposite on the Seahawks. I think Geno Smith doesn't really have a up year by any means, but I don't think he gets any worse. But I think that so many other players on that team, especially these two running backs, continue to grow, and with that offensive line continuing to grow, I think that the Seahawks are only going up from here. So it'll be intriguing to see what they do.
And moving on to number 6 for me is the Indianapolis Colts with Jonathan Taylor and Trey Sermon. And this is one of these where I was talking about earlier, where it's definitely running back one heavy. I am very high on Jonathan Taylor, and I think that he is a fantastic running back. And he just he re-signed with Indianapolis late last year, and I think he's going to have a bounce back season after a very bad year last year. And because of that, he's much lower on some lists, but I have him pretty high on this list because I think that he's going to have a fantastic year, a comeback type of year, and or a most improved player type of year, which is a new award that they're going to award this year, most improved instead of comeback player of the year.
Really?
Yep.
That's cool. I like
Yeah.
that.
So because comeback player of the year is more for like coming off of an injury.
Yeah.
And they went to Joe Flacco last year.
They're like,
so they had to re-verify.
They're like, Flacco won it. Yeah, we got to get rid of that one.
They had to change the rules on
Got to
it.
retire it with him.
But because of that, I think that Jonathan Taylor is going to be one of those most improved players, and he's going to lead the Indianapolis Colts to a fantastic year this year.
Yeah, of course, there's not much more I could say about Jonathan Taylor. Even when he has his down seasons like he had a year ago, he's still just a beast. I mean, it wasn't his fault when he had that down season, in my opinion. That whole team was falling apart, but when they continued to get better and the team around him got better, he, of course, absolutely exploded and got better. But I actually really like Trey Sermon. I'm blanking on where he came out of for college. But I remember when he first got drafted by the 49ers, a lot of scouts and a lot of 49ers fans were actually really high on him.
I want to say Ohio State.
That sounds correct. I know it was a bigger school like that. But yeah, I remember when he came out, a lot of people were really high on him, and just with guys like Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell and that other guy that they had when Elijah Mitchell got hurt, I'm blanking on his name. He never really got his chance in San Francisco, is the moral of the story. So I'll be interested to see what he can do because, like I said, my favorite thing is complementary running backs, and I think that he really well complements what Jonathan Taylor does as a running back. So I think Trey Sermon could actually be much better of a running back than people would expect.
Yeah, I didn't give much thought to Trey Sermon. Like I said, I looked at this as kind of a top-heavy team. So.
I think he might be one of those guys. I mean, you see it every year, especially nowadays with how running backs are a dime a dozen, where a first, second, maybe even up to third-year guy like Trey Sermon really breaks off the page all out of nowhere. And it's like, wow, when did it click for him? And it wasn't when did it click, it's when did he finally get his chance? When did he get the right situation? And I think that's something we could see with Trey Sermon right here. But moving on to my number 5 and into the top 5 range. Or wait, am I off one? Yeah,
no, you're
sorry.
on 6.
My number 6, I am going with the New England Patriots with Ramondre Stevenson and new pickup Antonio Gibson from the Washington Commanders. Now, I was really high on Ramondre Stevenson last year, and it's funny that actually we had these side to side with Jonathan Taylor because I think the reason that he not necessarily had a down year last year but didn't improve at all last year is because, of course, the team around him wasn't doing him any favors. So I think that the Patriots aren't really going to do a ton better, but one thing that's going to help him a lot is having a number 2 running back that complements him well. It's going to be the word of the episode for me. I'm going to say complimentary and compliments a lot. But when he had Ezekiel Elliott last year, they were very similar running backs. So it was like when Zeke came in, it got him a breather, but the defense could just prepare the same way. The defense didn't have to change anything. But now you bring in Antonio Gibson from Washington, who's a much more receiving-oriented running back, which is where Ramondre Stevenson kind of not slacks per se, but definitely doesn't thrive by any means. So I think that when you make the defense kind of have to spread out more and you have to make them second guess a little bit, who's going to be the running back? What's that running back going to do when they're in there? It really loosens up the pressure on Ramondre Stevenson. And though the team around him might not be quite as good, the running back room and his running back two being a little better, I think will help him and that he might have a little bit more of a breakout. And that's not even mentioning Antonio Gibson, who I think is really good himself. He was killing it that one year. I want to say it was 2021 with the Commanders before they got Brian Robinson Jr. And then he continued to do really well even after they drafted Brian Robinson Jr. So I think that he is that ultimate, not even running back two, but just duo back. I think he's really thrives in that switching out and not being a number one guy. So overall, I'll have to see how it plays out, especially with the talent around him. But I do really like Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson kind of having comeback years this year. And I'm actually going to slide straight to my number 5 because I am moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, who I think are very similar situations. I think if you compare them, Najee to Ramondre and Jaylen Warren to Antonio Gibson, it's a very similar situation. Like I said, they even have the similar builds, the similar skill sets. So I don't really have much more to say outside of what I already said about the Patriots. But the reason I have them above the Patriots is I think across the board, the Steelers are a much better team. They're not going to have a brand new head coach this year, which always helps. And I think that Najee Harris really started to show himself last year. He had like the lowest yards per carry or something 2 years ago, and everyone was like, oh, he's a bust. And it's like, he had the lowest yards per carry because he had like the most carries in the league by an absurd amount. It was an insane comparison there. But when they were able to kind of pass the ball more and get the run game going, get the pass game going rather, he really thrived in that run game more. And one of the huge things that helped them get that pass game going was when they could switch in Jaylen Warren and have him come out of the backfield. And I think that both with Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson, and with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, we're going to see a lot of 2 running back sets because they have that different skill set where you can really thrive in a 2 running back set.
Yeah, those are some nice duos there. I didn't really consider either one of them just because I don't expect the teams to do very well this year, especially the Patriots, who did just re-sign Ramondre Stevenson to a 4-year deal. So he is their running back of the future, and he is their running back 1. Antonio Gibson is a very nice complementary piece to him because, like you said, great receiving back, one of the best in the league at that, and just one of the better part duo of a running back because he was always in the duos with Washington. Him and whether it was Brian Robinson Jr. or I can't think of their other running back that they had.
You see that he had that one year where he kind of did okay as a number 1 back, but he just does better as a duo guy.
Yeah. And then as far as the Steelers go with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren almost looked like the better running back at the end of last year.
Did.
He was more complete in the terms of he could run block, he could pass block, he could catch out of the backfield, and he wasn't afraid to go in between the tackles. Najee Harris, obviously being the bruiser, should be the one going in between the tackles, but he just seemed to, I don't know, almost be kind of lazy. I don't know. I didn't like that whole low yards per carry. Yes, he had a lot of carries, but I think that's a chance to give yourself a high yards per carry. Because if you had a high yards per carry with all those carries to go with it, you could put up monster numbers, and he just had the opportunity to do that and didn't capitalize on those monster numbers. And because of that, I just don't think that he's going to be a very good running back. I think he's going to continue to decline.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One thing that they didn't have during that low yard per carry year, though, that I really factored in this is the last 2 years in the draft especially, I think the Steelers have drafted really well when it comes to offensive line. I think that they've continued to do that and really made that their focus, and I think that they've thrived in it. And I think that'll, of course, help not only Najee Harris especially, but even Jaylen Warren and that whole offense as a whole, because it all starts at the offensive line. It really does at the end of the day.
And moving on to my number 5, I have Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Gainwell of the Philadelphia Eagles. And this is another one where I kind of lean towards the number 1 running back here. But Kenneth Gainwell, I think, is a much nicer complementary piece compared to these some of these other running back heavy rooms, because Kenneth Gainwell has been that more just all around running back, like I was just saying about Jalen Warren, as the fact that he can pass block, catch out of the backfield, and go in between the tackles. And they also have Boston Scott to throw in there too, with a little change of pace, a little scat back. So I really like the Eagles running back room. They also have fantastic weapons at wide receiver and tight end. And I think that their only big decline here is going to be on how well Jalen Hurts plays. And I think that Jalen Hurts, who kind of started to decline a little bit at the end of last year, I don't know if the pressure started getting to him. The Eagles, after losing to the Jets, really started to fall apart and ended up missing the playoffs. And I think that because of that, I got them a little bit lower here, but they do sign Saquon Barkley, who is one of my favorite running backs.
Small correction. I think they made the playoffs and got bounced round one, but I'd have to check
Oh,
that
did
too.
they?
I think so. But yeah, I like this pick here. Saquon Barkley is, of course, not much you can't say about Saquon Barkley. He is just an absolute beast. He's like Derrick Henry, one of those guys who almost seem inhuman sometimes. And, his big question was that injury question mark, but he really proved that last year by taking a workload and still staying healthy, still playing every game, if I'm not mistaken, at least very close to it. And then now he goes to a rival and kind of gets a chance to go against his former team in the Giants and absolutely go off and tear them apart. But ironically, Kenneth Gainwell is the Giant killer. He's the guy who gets like 4 touchdowns a year versus the Giants in the 2 games they play. So I mean, they're just going to rush for like 700 yards against the Giants, apparently.
Yep.
But I think my biggest kind of what if or question mark right here is going to be that offensive line and how it continues after losing a leader like Jason Kelsey to retirement and having a right tackle who's another year older in Lane Johnson. Because I want to say he's pushing like mid to late 30s, which is pretty damn high for a football player.
He's been in the league for a while.
They're getting older and older nowadays, but nonetheless, that's still pretty damn high for a professional football player. But moving on to my number 4, I have an NFC East rival to the Philadelphia Eagles with the Washington Commanders and newly signed Austin Eckler as well as Brian Robinson Jr. And I might as well I should have worn a shirt that said it today. These guys are such compliments to each other. Brian Robinson is that pure power back. You don't see him outside of the tackles because why would you? He wants to be inside the tackles. He wants to be laying the boom on those defensive linemen. And Austin Eckler can go inside the tackles a little bit. He doesn't shy away from it, but he's so much better when you give him some space, and especially when you get the ball in his hands past the line of scrimmage in the pass game. So not a ton to say here with either of these guys individually. I really love Austin Eckler, but I think that he's declining a little bit. He's a little bit past his prime. And I really like Brian Robinson Jr., but I think he's a little bit of a one-trick pony. But when you put 2 one-trick ponies together, it makes a pretty damn good show. So I do have them pretty high here just because of how well they're going to bounce off of each other.
Yeah, I really like this duo as a pure duo. I have them at number 4 for me also. I think that they're going to do really well this year. Washington's not going to do great as a team, but as far as a duo goes, this is one of the better duos. Like you said, they complement each other very well. Austin Eckler, who's looking for a little bit, not so much wear and tear, coming from LA, he said they wanted a running back who could carry the ball 300 times, which, I mean, is what a running back is supposed to do, is carry the ball. So I don't know what he's complaining about because that's kind of his job, but I do see where he's coming from, just in the sense of he doesn't want to get beat up that much. Yeah. What he's trying to get at is that he's worried about, his injury history. So because of that, I don't see Washington using him as like a pure ground and pound running back, which is not his style anyways. He's definitely better out in space and out receiving the ball as probably the best receiving running back in the NFL.
I'd agree. I completely agree. And that's what a perfect place for him to go then, because Brian Robinson Jr. just seems like one of those guys who are like, I'll do it. I'll carry the ball 300 times. So doesn't get any better than that. Moving on to my number 3, I have the duo that I couldn't put as my number 1, but I kind of wanted to because I love this duo so much. I have the Houston Texans with Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce was really one of my favorite running backs last year. He was just a true do-it-all guy. Whatever you asked him to do, he was going to go do it. And for a rookie, he did it so amazingly well. He came out of Florida last year as a rookie and didn't really have the highest praise. No one was against him by any means, but no one in mini camp or training camp really had him doing what he did that season as a number one starting back. And then now you put him in a situation where you take so much pressure off of him and bring in that veteran presence like Joe Mixon, who's really a pretty damn good do-it-all guy himself. I know that's kind of going against my whole motto of complementary backs, the fact that they're pretty similar, but they're just both so good at what they do, and they're both so do-it-all that it's kind of hard to compliment with them anyway. So you complement each other by being similar because you do everything. So I really love this duo, and I agree with Callan. I think the Texans are going to be an extremely good team this year. Still a little young. I'm not going to say like Super Bowl contenders or anything crazy, but I see them pretty comfortably winning the AFC South and getting at least 1 or 2 playoff wins.
Yeah, I mentioned this duo earlier in my list, and I only had them kind of so much lower because why did the Cincinnati Bengals let go of Joe Mixon? What are we missing here about Joe Mixon that Cincinnati let him walk away? And that kind of worries me just a little bit as far as Houston goes. Although they do have Dameon Pierce to back up, if Mixon becomes kind of a bust, but I just don't know. I think it's a great duo on paper, but the only thing that worries me is why did Cincinnati let him go? Because Cincinnati did not really have anybody waiting in the wings.
It is a fun question mark to think about that, that's for sure.
Yeah. And moving on to my number 3, I got the Atlanta Falcons and Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. And this is another running back one heavy because I really like Bijan Robinson. I think that he is going to have a possible MVP candidacy kind of year this year. With Kirk Cousins at quarterback, Drake London and Kyle Pitts having resurgent years, I could see Bijan Robinson really having a breakout year. And he's got a great partner with Tyler Algier, who was a starter before they drafted Bijan Robinson. So another one of these former starters who become your running back too. And I think that just makes for a perfect duo. You get guys with experience. You got guys that are leaders. And Bijan Robinson is going to be a leader for this team this year. And I really see him having, I don't want to say 2,000 yards because that's
a big
number. But I could definitely see him leading the league in rushing this year.
Interesting. So both of his seasons, I've been a big Tyler Algier guy, but he's kind of let me down. Not because he's had terrible seasons per se, but because I had really high expectations for him. He just kind of had mediocre years. So that's what pushed the Falcons down to more of like a 11, 12, 13 duo for me. But I don't argue at all that Bijan Robinson has a chance to be really freaking good. To be honest, just with kind of how that offense is going to be set up and how much Kirk Cousins likes to get the run game going, I don't think 2,000 yards is fully out of the question. It's definitely improbable, definitely going to be a push, but I don't think it's fully out of the question. But these guys personally didn't fall in my top 10 and wouldn't have came this high, but I do really like both of these guys. So now moving on to my number 2, and maybe one of the shockers for my list for a different reason, for being lower rather than higher, I have the San Francisco 49ers with Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell. Now, it kind of seems like these guys should be the number 1, but Elijah Mitchell just has not really been everything he should be. With a couple of times when their starting running back got injured before they had Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell stepped up really well as kind of that fill-in back. But then as the weeks went on and he kind of continued to be the number 1 back, he just couldn't replicate those first few games of good success. And then now you bring in Christian McCaffrey, who's just unarguably the best running back in the league, in my opinion. I 100% think he should have been the MVP this year. I think that this year, or this prior year, I should say now, was full proof that MVP is just a quarterback award. Because I don't know how he didn't win it if it's not just a quarterback award. But nonetheless, I'll get off my soapbox there. I just have these guys a little lower than my number 1 because I don't think that they are a true equals or duos the way my number one is. And I love Christian McCaffrey to death, and I really like Elijah Mitchell, but he wasn't enough of a running back two to move up to that one spot for me.
Yeah, and kind of a spoiler, I got them as number one for that reason. Is that Christian McCaffrey is the all-around running back. He is the MVP, or should have been the MVP, and he can be the running back one and the running back two. That was how I looked at it. Is that he didn't need a partner. He was the running back one and the running back two. So any play you put with him, I was going to put at number one just because he's the best overall player and best overall running back and maybe the best overall player in the NFL when you talk about pound for pound, just because of his ability to run the ball, catch the ball, block. He really is a pure football player, and he does it all.
And out of the 64 running backs on this list, he's the only one I would have considered putting Christian McCaffrey / Christian McCaffrey because he is.
He can do that. But moving on to my number two is the New Orleans Saints and Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams. And I got them at number two because this is the best overall duo. Now, in terms of 1-2 punch, thunder and lightning, you got Alvin Kamara, who's going to have a full season this year. He's not suspended, so he's not going to miss the first 4 games of the year. He's going to have a full season. He's going to have a healthy season. And I think the Saints are going to be one of those surprise teams possibly this year. With Derek Carr as their quarterback. And then you got Jamal Williams to come in and give him a breather, a change of pace. He's kind of the ground and pound running back, but he's also that running back that, like we said earlier, will take the 300 carries, and he will do it all. And I think that he and Alvin Kamara just make up the best overall duo, and that's why I have them at number two and not number one, is because I just don't think that them combined still, to me, doesn't make what Christian McCaffrey is able to do.
It's a good point, and get ready to hear an echo because, shocker, my number one, I have Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams because they're just the best overall duo, the best 1-2 punch, the best thunder and lightning. These guys are just so good, and get ready, they complement each other so well. Alvin Kamara is a true outside the tackle guy. He is absolutely elite in the passing game. He showed that last year by the second half of the year, pretty much playing receiver and absolutely thriving in that role. And then Jamal Williams is going to come in. He's going to be a little bit more of your bruiser. If you're inside the 5-yard line, he's going to get you those touchdowns. Now, last year, that wasn't quite the case. I want to say he only had literally 2 or 3 touchdowns last year. But the year before that, he led the league in touchdowns with it was 18 to 20, somewhere around that area. It was a crazy amount of touchdowns. So you got to imagine he finds some middle ground in there, maybe more that 10 to 12 touchdown range, which is pretty damn respectable for a running back too. That's because that's what he does. Like Callan said, he's going to do whatever you ask him to do. And if you give him the ball inside the 5, he's got a nose for the end zone. He's going to find a way in. And Alvin Kamara is just the perfect guy to drive you down the field. I don't see the Saints being a playoff team by any means, but I do see them being a little better than people give them credit for because of a few select players and a few open positions are the reason I don't think they'll make the playoffs. But those few select players are going to have really good seasons.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara he can win games by himself. Yep. He's one of those. Vikings seen it firsthand. What did he get, 6 touchdowns?
It was 6 on Christmas Day. Surrounded by my family, watching Alvin Kamara drop 6 touchdowns on us with a fake smile.
Oops, I didn't mean to bring that up.
It was a great afternoon game. Yeah, all the fun of Christmas morning had worn off, and it was just pure dread watching that whole game.
Yeah.
It was a tough one.
And like I said earlier, my number one is the San Francisco 49ers and Christian McCaffrey. He is the 1 and the 2. He makes up the duo by himself. You can throw anyone else in there, and he's going to make it a good duo. Elijah Mitchell is a very nice counterpiece to him. Kind of a younger running back. He hasn't really proved himself yet as being a number 1, but he's learning from one of the best in the league, and maybe he'll learn something from him. If Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, I think that the 49ers will be all right with Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, I should have just put Christian McCaffrey / 52-man roster. Pick one. Just draw a name out of a hat. You don't need anybody else. But that was our 2024 top 10 running back duos predictions. I love when we get into the duos and especially the trios because the quarterback's a little bit more of a one-track thought process, which is why we had a similar list. But when you get into the duos, and like I said, especially the trios, you get to see such different thought processes between the two of us and kind of how we did it. So I love these two episodes. These are two of my favorite episodes of the year. So thank you all so much for watching, and make sure you stay tuned in until next week when you get one of my favorite episodes of the year, maybe outside of draft stuff and our wide receiver trio predictions. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.